What's up, weirdos?
Hey yo.
Me? Shit. I
Shit.
got me a little something rolled. The lights are low, and we're about to chop it up with Abigail on the Manic Pixie Weirdo podcast.
Okay, okay.
A safe space for weirdos of all shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds to relax and speak their piece.
Speak that
So
peace.
grab your glass of wine and grass the chief as I get off the mic so the main weirdo can speak. Peace.
Peace, God.
What is up, weirdos? You're listening to the Manic Pixie Weirdo. I'm Abigail, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about all the different kinds of relationships that you can have in your life. And this week, we are joined by a very special guest, Ed from the 80s Movie Podcast. Say hi and tell everybody where they can find you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edward Havens. I'm the host of the 80s Movie Podcast, which you can find practically everywhere where you listen to podcasts, or you can find me also on Twitter at the 80s Movie Pod, or I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm trying to learn TikTok, but I'm not very good at it.
Me too. And this week we are going to talk about our relationship with Hollywood. It's kind of a fun one. And I really wanted to have Ed on because he's got some really great stories that I really want him to share with everybody. So I guess let's just get right into it. Ed, what is your relationship with Hollywood and how has it developed like over the years?
I have a very tenuous relationship with Hollywood. It all started when I was 5 years old. My parents had gotten divorced, and my mom had started dating a guy named Toby who owned a junkyard down here in Southern California. Toby always wanted to be a filmmaker. So he decided that he was going to write a script that took advantage of all the things that he had available to him to make a film. He wrote it, he produced it, he directed it, he starred in it, and he would eventually even release it himself when all of the Hollywood studios rejected his final film. The name of the movie was Gone in 60 Seconds, and it ended up becoming one of the most successful independent features of the 1970s. And I spent most of that summer when I was 5 years old in 1973 watching Toby make this movie. And I knew at 5 years old that that is what I wanted to do. It was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And at 5 years old, yes, I had a sense of what was cool. That was cool. So I spent my entire childhood and young adulthood absorbing movies, specifically movies. There was television, there's music, there was other ways into the entertainment industry, but I wanted to be a filmmaker. And everything that I did was geared towards that. I saw hundreds of movies a year, whether it was on television, on cable, which was just starting to ramp up in the 70s, at movie theaters, at independent art houses that showed foreign film. It didn't matter what it was, if it was a foreign film, if it was an American film, if it was subtitled or dubbed. I didn't care. I just went to the movies and watched movies as much as I could. I graduated high school when I was 17 in June of 1985. And the day after I graduated from high school, I packed up my car and I moved back down to Los Angeles. I was going to make it in the movies. A year later, I moved back in with my mom, completely broke, humiliated at my abject failure of even booking a single gig as even a production assistant on anything. And I decided to get a job at a movie theater. I thought it was just going to be a summer thing, earn some money, save up some money, and then go back down to LA and give it another try. But it seemed I was really good at being a movie theater employee, that my boss had promoted me to assistant manager within 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he said, there's a side story to that. When I came home, I came home like on a Saturday, early June 1986. And my friends and I went to see a movie because that's what we did. Whenever we were together, we'd go to the movies. And I thought, hey, it'd be cool to get a job at a movie theater, right? Especially if you want to be a filmmaker. You could watch the movies whenever you wanted. You can study the films up close on a 50-foot screen, because back then movie theaters were still big. And I put in an application on Saturday, got a call on Monday. Can I come in on Tuesday for an interview? I go in on Tuesday, great interview. He says, come back on Friday and we'll get you started. I show up on Friday to find out I'd already been fired because because the manager who hired me and the entire staff was apparently robbing the theater blind, stealing candy, stealing money, stealing soda syrup, anything and anything that wasn't nailed down. Apparently they were ripping the place off blind. They got caught. Everybody got fired, including me. But I didn't know that when I walked in the door. So there's this guy. I show up and it's like, hi, my name's Ed. I'm here for my first day. And the guy that I'm dealing with it was like, okay, so here's the deal. And he kind of explained to me what happened. And so me being me, the tenacious, iron-willed warrior that I am, was like, okay, well, I understand where you're coming from, but you need to understand something. Up until last Friday, I was living in Los Angeles. I didn't know any of these people, hadn't started working here yet. Whatever was going on here, I had nothing to do with it. And if everybody got fired, you clearly need people, right? He goes, yes. I said, so let me make you an offer. Give me 2 weeks to prove myself to you. If I'm not one of the best employees you've ever had, I will leave after 2 weeks. I'll get my one paycheck and we'll never have to see each other again. And Joe, the manager, thought it over for a second. He goes, that seems like a fair request. So he gave me 2 weeks. And like I said, after 4 weeks, he promoted me to an assistant manager. He was like, I know that you want to be a filmmaker, but maybe, spend some time working for us here at the theater, become a manager. You're going to get paid better. You're going to have better benefits and maybe save up for a year or two and then head back down to Los Angeles and try to break in again. And I took him on his offer. So I was not quite 19 yet. And I was already an assistant manager. Most of the other managers were in their mid-20s. And I worked my butt off for 2 years. Are you familiar with Santa Cruz, California at all?
Not really, no.
Okay, so it's a smaller beach town. It's a college town. UC Santa Cruz, the Banana Slugs, as seen in Pulp Fiction. And there were 5 movie theaters in the area that were operated by United Artists, the company that I worked for. And within a year of my starting, not as an assistant manager, but the year of starting, I had keys to all 5 theaters. The 5 managers of the 5 theaters, they would literally get on a conference call every Monday afternoon after the bookings came in, and they would work out my schedule. And I would work 10 or 12 shifts a week. I would open one theater and then go to McDonald's or whatever, eat on my way, and close another theater. And I did that 6 days a week. And I would take Sundays off because on the 7th day, you rest. And so I saved up a whole lot of money, but I also really liked what I did. I loved my job. So instead of going back to Los Angeles, when I turned 21, I got promoted to general manager. And I was working a theater in San Jose, which is now Silicon Valley, the internet capital of the world. But back then, we didn't even have internet yet. But I was operating a small 4-screen dollar house. And again, I was loving what I did. But after about 4 years, I kind of got tired of the grind that I was in. And on a lark, my best friend Randy called me up one afternoon. This is like July of 91. And he said, hey, you know how I was supposed to move down to Los Angeles with Kyle and someone else? I can't remember who. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, someone else just dropped out. We've already rented the place. We need a roommate. You've always wanted to come back to Los Angeles and work in the film industry. We're moving next week. Why don't you come with us? And so I called up my boss. I said, I'm putting in my notice. if it's possible to transfer to Los Angeles, because United Artists had dozens of theaters in Los Angeles. It should have been super easy to just transfer to another theater. And my request was denied. So I just quit right then and there. And a week later, I was living in Hollywood, right across the street from the Directors Guild of America headquarters. Very nice part of Los Angeles, a lot of fun. And I spent all summer trying to break into the film industry. And by September, I was back working at the movie theaters, this time at a theater called the Beverly Center, which I actually did an episode about back in July. And I loved working there. It was a lot of fun. And so over the course of several years, I would be working at theaters and kind of putting my dreams on the back burner because I was having a lot of fun and I was making a good amount of money. And eventually, I was turning 30 and I had a kind of a midlife crisis, as it were. And it's like, you've wanted to do this your entire life. You have a good amount of money saved up. Let's go for it. You're turning 30. You've got lots of experience. Let's do it. So right after my 30th birthday, I was managing theaters back up in Northern California. I quit my job. I moved back down to Los Angeles. And I actually started breaking into the industry. I was started as a production assistant on student films and independent features. I worked my way up to second assistant director. Things were going very well. On one film, I even got to meet Carl Reiner and his wife Estelle, because their son, Lucas, not Rob, but Lucas Reiner, was the writer-director of this movie. And Carl and Estelle Reiner just showed up one afternoon just to see how their son was doing. So I got to meet Carl and Estelle Reiner, which was pretty freaking awesome. The movie was so bad it never got released, but at least I have that I have that experience of getting to meet Carl Reiner and, more importantly, Estelle Reiner, because if you know anything about the Reiners, you got Rob Reiner, who's a very talented filmmaker and a very funny actor. Carl Reiner, who was a genius comedian and actor and writer. But Estelle, Rob's mother, Carl's wife, was actually the funniest person I've ever actually met. And I actually got a compliment from Carl Reiner. When they came down to the set, of course, everybody just gravitates towards Carl Reiner because he's Carl freaking Reiner, right?
Right.
And Estelle was just kind of standing there alone. And the second AD doesn't really spend a lot of time on the sets. They're mostly creating call sheets in the production office or the production van and making phone calls and dealing with small fires. So, but we were on a break and I saw Mrs. Reiner standing there by herself. I just went over and talked to her. Now, the only reason I even really knew who she was is because if you've seen When Harry Met Sally, I'm presuming you've seen Harry Met Sally. Abigail?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And excuse me.
Yeah.
And there's the scene in the deli where Meg Ryan fakes an orgasm, and then there's a woman at the next table who says, "I'll have what she's having."
Yeah.
That's Estelle Reiner. That's Rob Reiner's
Oh
mom.
my gosh. Okay.
That's Carl Reiner's wife. That's Rob Reiner's mom. And she ad-libbed that line. It's the best line in the movie. And she just came up with it on the spot. She was freaking
amazing.
Hilarious. So I spent about half hour and we were just talking about life. We weren't talking about the industry. We weren't talking about her husband or her kids. We were just talking. And then after about a half an hour, Carl Reiner the crowd around Carl Reiner is kind of dissipated and he comes over to us. And Estelle excuses herself to go talk to her son, Lucas. And so I'm there by myself with Carl Reiner. And he goes, "I just wanted to say thank you to me." He goes, "Whenever we do these things, everybody gravitates towards me. Nobody talks to my wife. So I just wanted to say thank you for being a good human being and just noticing that she was there and having conversation." And I felt a sense of pride that Carl Reiner had noticed this gesture, and two, felt very sad for Estelle Reiner because she really was a wonderful woman and very funny. You want to know where Rob Reiner got his comedy? Not from his dad. He got it from his mom. The way that, because if you watch Carl Reiner, you watch Rob Reiner, they have different kind of timings and deliveries. And Rob Reiner, after meeting his mom, it's all his mom. So,
Oh, wow.
so I was doing really well, and then I met a girl, and I got married right before my 31st birthday, literally the day before my 31st birthday, because who's going to forget their anniversary if it's the day before their birthday? And slowly, married life kind of got me out of the industry again, to the point where I ended up living in rural Colorado. You've heard of Denver. You've heard
Mhm.
you've heard of Boulder, right?
Right.
The two of the biggest cities in Colorado. Well, I was living about an hour north of Denver in a town called Berthoud.
Oh,
You've probably never
I feel
heard of.
like I've driven through there.
Okay, well, if you've gone from Longmont to Loveland to
Yes.
if you've gone through there, you've driven past Berthoud, because
Okay. Okay.
Berthoud is actually just like a small farming area. It's just because my wife wasn't happy in Los Angeles. She had moved to Los Angeles to become a screenwriter, and she got disillusioned with the industry. So she actually wanted to move back home to Colorado near her parents. And so to save the marriage, I gave up my dreams and moved to Colorado. And she was happy, but I was miserable. So we got divorced in 2001. And I decided, instead of moving back to California like I would normally do, I was going to go the opposite direction and move to New York, specifically New York City, because there's a pretty vibrant industry, film and television
Hmm.
production industry in New York. So I spent 8 months saving up after Heather and I split up. And I lived in a $300 a month apartment, which sounds like junk, but in rural Colorado in 2001, it was actually a very nice apartment for $300 a month. And I saved up and I saved up. And then at the time, I was driving a 1972 Mustang Mach 1 fastback with a 302 engine. And even though it was not in very good condition, I was able to sell that car for almost $15,000 to a collector who wanted to restore it.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so I moved to New York on September 9th, 2001. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, I didn't technically move to New York. What I did is I flew to New York that weekend, rented an apartment, ended up meeting the woman who is now and still my wife that day. And she actually moved into the apartment after, because she was in New York. And she moved into the apartment, and I had to go back to Colorado to finish my job, pack up my stuff, and move my stuff to New York. So I flew out Sunday night. Monday, it's just a normal day. On Tuesday, I wake up, everything is normal. I get in my car, I drive to work, and by the time I get to work, everything happened.
Oh, my gosh.
9/11. Now here's the thing. Cassie, the girl I just met, who we just had an instant attraction, and was now living in the apartment that I had rented. I just had a sense about her. She was supposed to work at the World Trade Center that day, and her alarm didn't go off.
Oh, my
She
God.
so now it's my understanding that, well, because she was at the time working at the Gap in near Washington Square, but she was supposed to be helping out at the Gap at the World Trade Center Mall that week because somebody was going on vacation, and she was kind of like a relief manager. So she was supposed to be at the store. So my understanding is that everybody who was working at that Gap store got out before the towers collapsed. That anybody who was working at the Gap that day survived. But for some reason, she either slept through her alarm or she forgot to set her alarm or whatever, but she was asleep when all of it happened. But because everything was crazy, that, you know, the big tower for cell phone usage covering Manhattan was on the top of the World Trade Center and it was gone. So it took me 2 days to get a hold of her.
Oh my gosh.
And those were two of the worst days of my life. There's this fantastic, I just met this fantastic woman. We're supposed to be living together. And now I can't even get a hold of her because the apartment didn't have a phone yet because we literally just rented it 2 days earlier. So I finally got a hold of her. Everything was fine. She flew out to Denver a couple weeks later, and we packed up my stuff and moved. Got a U-Haul, and I hate to say this, got a U-Haul for practically nothing because so many people were moving out of New York City that U-Haul really needed people to be moving trucks to New York because there was such a demand for them. Because right after 9/11, there was an exodus of people out of New York. So I was able to get a truck in Denver for practically nothing because I was taking it to New York City and they needed that truck in New York City. So, yeah, so over the course of time, I never actually got to work in the film industry. I was able to option a couple screenplays to some independent production companies. I've had meetings on the Warner Brothers lot with producers about some of the scripts I wrote that ended up not getting sold. So have you ever heard of a documentary called 20 Feet from Stardom?
No.
So that's basically my life in a nutshell. 20 Feet to Stardom, it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature several years ago. And it's about the backup singers in, you know, if you go to a concert or you watch a music video or whatever, there's the band, and then in the back there's these background singers, right, who add vocals to, you know, the song, right?
Right.
And this movie 20 Feet to Stardom is about these fantastic background singers who, you know, they're on stage with Mick Jagger, they're on stage with Beyonce, they're on stage with, you know, Elton John or whatever, but the spotlight's not on them because they're not the superstar. So this documentary, it was about the background singers on some of your favorite songs and some of your favorite videos and stuff. And that's kind of me. It's like all these things that I did over my life, I'm almost there. I'm practically touching the brass ring, but it's just out of reach. So as much as I love Hollywood, and I still live in Los Angeles. I no longer have any illusions about trying to break into the film industry, but it took me many years to accept that that was not meant to be for me.
Well, you never know. It's never too late.
It's not too late. It's just something that I'm no longer actively pursuing. One of my best friends, Tony, who used to write for my website, Film Jerk, he was in a similar situation where he actually was, he wanted to be a filmmaker. He actually optioned a screenplay at Warner Brothers, but it never got made. He's in several episodes of Buffy because he was a teenager around the time that it was being made, and he lived in the area. So he's got several scenes in Buffy. It's like, oh, hey, there's Tony again. Right.
That's
He's
so
actually
cool.
he's actually on screen, but he's in a similar situation where now he's in his, you know, mid 40s, and instead of being an actor or filmmaker, he's actually heavily in politics in Anaheim, trying to keep the blue wave going in a majorly red area. So we talk about our you know, dreams from time to time. Wouldn't have been interesting if X happened or Y happened, but in the end, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. My life is more fulfilling than I ever could have possibly believed it to be, just because of my upbringing wasn't the best. I mean, that's true for many of us, but you know, to be where I am now from where I started is almost miraculous. And without going into my wife's background, similar situation where she had it much rougher than I did. And now that she's a lawyer, and we have a beautiful house, and we have, we're going to Thailand for 2 weeks in December for Christmas and New Year's, and be able to travel the world. I found other things in life that are fulfilling, where I no longer feel bad about not making it. But again, I've had so many experiences where now I could be talking to you about these experiences, and not be wistful or depressed, because how many people get to say they got to be Brad Pitt's bodyguard for a night?
Right? Oh my gosh, you have to tell that story.
Okay, I'm gonna pause I'm gonna give myself, because I have to cough real quick. Excuse me.
We'll take a quick break. What is up, you guys? I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our sponsor for this episode, Newsly. It's an audio app for iOS and Android where they basically take articles from all over the world and all the trending topics that are on the web at any given moment, and it reads them to you in like a natural voice, like a human being would. It's basically the first time in the history of the internet where the entire web becomes listenable. It's really cool, you guys. They have all different kinds of articles from all different kinds of topics so that you can like stop scrolling and start listening, which I really love. You can follow all the, any topic, all the topics, whatever topic you want to talk about or listen about, from sports, science, Bitcoin, even the Kardashians, like everybody. They have all the latest articles and it reads them to you. So it's super easy. They also have podcasts, which is why I'm talking to you guys about it, because our podcast, along with podcasts from over 50 other countries, are on the app. So that's really, really cool. You can start listening there as well. You can download and use Newsly for free right now at www.newsly.me, or you can use this link in the description, and when you use the promo code P1X1EP0DCAST, that will give you a free month of premium subscription to Newsly. So go check it out, you guys. And thank you so much to Newsly for sponsoring this episode.
All right. Are we ready again?
And we're back.
Okay. Okay, so Brad Pitt. In 1995, I was managing a theater in Santa Monica. It's a 2-screen art house theater called the New Wilshire. And it was part of Landmark Theaters. I don't know if you're familiar with Landmark Theaters. They are the #1 chain of art house cinemas in the nation. And we used to do a lot of events with a group that's now called Film Independent. Do you know the Spirit Awards? The Independent? Yeah. So they actually run the Spirit Awards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but back in the 90s, they were still called the Independent Feature Project. And they were run by a lady named Dawn Hudson, who until about 6 months ago was the head of the Motion Picture Academy.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but in the 90s, Dawn was running basically the Independent Academy. And we did a lot of events at my theater with the IFP, hosting advanced screenings of upcoming movies with the filmmakers there. So I have a poster somewhere in storage that was signed by Kevin Smith and his producer, Scott Mosier, when we did a screening of Clerks about 3 or 4 weeks before it opened. I got to meet a lot of people at my theater doing these Q&As. But one day, Dawn calls me up at home on my day off. She goes, sorry to call you at home, but you're not working at the theater today. And I kind of asked them for your home number, so please don't get mad at them. But we have an event coming up tomorrow that I kind of need your help with. I said, okay, what's up? She goes, well, you're kind of a big guy. I'm 6'3", 220 pounds. Said, I need somebody who is detail-oriented and somewhat intimidating like you are, to take Brad Pitt and Gwyneth Paltrow to a movie premiere, and then take care of them at the premiere, get them to the after party, get them back home. So the movie is called Living in Oblivion, which is a Steve Buscemi movie. It's actually one of the first movies with Peter Dinklage as well. And it's about an independent filmmaker and his adventures trying to make a movie. It's a very funny movie. The director of the movie, his name is Tom DiCillo. And a couple of years before this, he had made a movie called Johnny Handsome, which was Brad Pitt's first starring role. He made it after Thelma and Louise, but before Thelma and Louise actually came out. So he was still a struggling actor at the time. But he was so grateful to Tom DiCillo for giving him his first starring role that when it came time to have the premiere for Living in Oblivion, Brad Pitt got invited to the premiere and said yes. And having Brad Pitt by this time in 1995, he's still a couple of weeks away from truly becoming a star with Seven, but he'd already been in Legends of the Fall and several other movies that have kind of made him a star. But he wouldn't move to that next level until Seven came out a few weeks later. But I get picked up in the limo. We drive up to Brad and Gwyneth's house, pick them up, get them to the screening. And, my job is basically take care of them. So the screening goes off without a hitch. We go to the after party. And while we're in the limo on the way to the after party, I mentioned to him that the girl that I was dating at the time, her father was the representative, was the agent for the people who wrote 12 Monkeys. 12 Monkeys wouldn't come out for another 6 months. So I said, I read the script. I'm totally looking forward to this. And Brad Pitt's eyes lit up because it's like you could tell he was excited for this movie. So we spent like 3 hours at the after party, just the two of us, ignoring Gwyneth Paltrow, drinking tequila and talking about this movie that wasn't even going to be out for another half a year.
Oh my gosh.
And so now I have no illusions that Brad Pitt even remembers me 27 years later, that, he would, even if I mentioned it, he might not even remember it. But for, being able to say I was Brad Pitt's bodyguard for a night.
That's
Wow.
pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So, so it was just like things like this kept happening to me where I would be like on the edge of someone else's life where it's like you're able to just peek behind the curtain in Oz, like the dog Toto, but you don't actually get to be that person. So
Right.
there's and it just, but it was a lot of fun because there was no way that I would have the access to all of these things if it wasn't for that initial start back when I was 5 years old, knowing that I wanted to make movies. So,
Oh yeah.
but that's for many years. That's where my life, I kept trying to lead my life, and it just never happened. And then the funny part is, when my nephew was 5, he told me, I want to be a filmmaker. And the cycle started all over again. So now it's like, when it's time to introduce him to Star Wars, I'm not showing him the DVD of the, special editions. I'm showing him the versions that I experienced for the first time when I was like 9 years old, the way that they were originally meant to be seen. And so for like 4 years, I just indulged this kid. And I was having a fantastic time because, okay, well, if I can't be a filmmaker, then maybe Alex can be a filmmaker. Or maybe it'll happen for Alex. And then that went on for several years. And then last year he decided instead he wanted to be oh God, I can't remember, but basically he wanted to be involved in world politics. And my heart sank. I love Alex so much, but it's just like to go from filmmaker to geopolitics, world geopolitics. It's like, oh man. But he's a good kid. I love him. But
yeah,
it
totally
broke my heart because it's like I have all this knowledge I could help him with, and now I don't get to use it.
What a bummer.
Yeah,
that kind of stinks.
Yeah, but he's a good kid. I'm not.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so I kind of want to go back to something that you said in the beginning,
Okay.
just because I'm sort of fangirling a little bit.
Okay.
Wait, so your stepdad wrote Gone in 60 Seconds?
My mom and Toby never got married, and in fact, by the time the movie came out, they had already broken up. But yeah,
Oh,
so they were together for about a year and a half. But the important part is that they were together when the film was being made. And I'm talking the original 1974 version, not the Nicolas Cage remake.
oh, okay, very cool.
So so if you ever watch it, um, not the Nicolas Cage version, but the original version, there's a scene early in the movie where there's a wedding going on, and the bride is my mom.
Oh,
And she's not playing the girlfriend of the lead character that Toby's playing, but she's just playing the bride because he needed a beautiful woman
right,
to be the bride in this scene. And my mom, especially in the early 70s, was a very beautiful woman, and she still is, but she was absolutely gorgeous in the early 70s. And he needed a gorgeous woman to play the bride. And she doesn't have any lines. She's just seen it. Yeah, there's several close-ups of her, but she's just there as background. The next scene takes place in a park, and there's an establishing shot in the park where there's this little boy about 5 years old wearing a Rams jacket and a Rams hat who's being chased by two girls in the park. And then the camera moves on to um, a conversation that's happening in the park about the setup for the main part of the plot, a bunch of cars getting stolen.
right.
The little boy in the Rams hat and the Rams jacket, that is me.
Oh,
So if you ever watch it, and it all happens in the first 15 minutes, and it's actually a really good movie, especially when you consider that it was pretty much made by a bunch of amateurs, and and it predates like Smokey and the Bandit and the other big, car chase movies by a couple of years. It kind of set the standard for the car chase movie. But there's a 40-minute long chase sequence at the end of the film that has almost never been topped in almost 50 years of filmmaking because it is 100% natural. That stuff really happened. At one point, Toby's driving the Eleanor, the Mustang, up the 110 freeway. At the 10, at the time it was the 10, but now it's the 110, and that's how we talk in California. But he's driving at like 100 miles an hour, and the freeway is not closed down for shooting. He's just set up cameras, and he's just gonna steal shots as he can. Except a car got in his way while he was filming the sequence, and he ends up slamming into a light pole at nearly 100 miles an hour.
oh no.
But he caught it on film, and it actually stayed in the film because that is an incredible stunt that you could never plan the way it happened. And that still even only happens in the first like quarter of the chase. There's still like a half an hour more to go. That ends in a spectacular slow motion jump that again has rarely been topped in movies in 50 years. So if you ever have the opportunity to see the original 1974 Gone in 60 Seconds, you now have a direct connection to that movie through me.
That's so cool. Oh my
You,
gosh, that's so cool.
you have an Oracle of Bacon factor of one.
What was that like to be, did you know that you were going to be in the film, like at that young of an age?
Well, I'm only in one scene, and it was because, again, Toby was using his friends and anything he could in order to make the movie. So my mom would be hanging out on the set. So when I was with my mom, I was on the set with my mom, and Toby was there. And then that day in the park, I'm wearing my Rams jacket. I'm wearing my Rams hat. And he goes like, "Hey, you're going to go over there. These two girls are going to chase you. Don't look at the camera. Just play along." Right? And that's what I did. I didn't look at the camera. I just played along, and these girls are chasing me. And I don't know, we maybe did it 2 or 3 times, and it made the movie. So that was my first movie experience,
That's
and
so cool.
it hooked me to the point where here we are, 50 years later, practically, because he shot it in the summer of 1973. So we're getting close on the 50th anniversary of the shooting. Toby, unfortunately, is no longer with us. He actually died setting up a stunt in 1989 for Gone in 60 Seconds 2, which was never completed because it's hard to finish a movie when your star and director has died.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I never got the opportunity to thank Toby for directly influencing my life in the way that he has. I would not be here talking to you today. I would not be the movie fanatic that I am, being able to have a podcast like my podcast, if it wasn't directly related to Toby deciding to make a movie at that time in his life.
Right. It's so like interesting and sometimes like weird, I think, how like it evolves just in our lives, like these little experiences that we have like shape us and like, into the future and like how we grow up and what it is that we want to become.
Yeah.
Did you ever like did you know what you wanted to do in Hollywood, or was it just like I want to be in Hollywood in some way?
Oh,
Like did you
I knew I
Oh,
wanted to be a director. I knew
okay.
I wanted to be the next Steven Spielberg. I wanted to be the next Toby Halicki. I wanted to be the next big thing. And I knew that. So when I was watching a movie as a kid, I wasn't just watching the movie. I was watching the camera angles. I was watching the editing, the pacing, the music, because I was studying film the way that like Martin
Mhm.
Scorsese would study a film when he was watching them. And so, and I would latch on to certain filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, like Spike Lee, like Steven Spielberg, where like David Lean, who did Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, where I'd be watching their style of filmmaking because they all have their own individual way of making a movie. If you watch enough Spielberg movies, you'll start noticing certain techniques of his that he incorporates into almost every film. If you watch Jurassic Park, when Alan Grant sees the dinosaur for the first time, and then he taps Ellie because she's talking and not paying attention, and then you see her get up through the sunroof, and the camera kind of like zooms in on her.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see that similar shot in more than half of all of Spielberg's movies. It's just one of those things that he loves to do, where to enhance the excitement of that character's discovery of something. That's a signature Spielberg camera shot.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you're watching Spielberg movies, you'll see it in Close Encounters. You'll see it in Jaws. You'll see it in so many of his movies because that's his shorthand for a sense of wonder to a particular character at that moment in their story. And these are things that as someone who was studying film, you start to catch. For an average viewer, and I'm not saying that regular people who aren't studying film, who aren't becoming like film historians, whatever, are dumb. It's just it's one of those things that unless you're specifically noticing it, you're not noticing it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
but also because it's a Spielberg movie, that when that thing comes on, you subconsciously have the memories of the other times that he did that type of thing in other movies. So it makes a connection to you and the filmmaker because and it's a very subtle thing. They're not banging your head over it, but a lot of filmmakers love to do things like zoom in and dolly out at the same time. So if you watch Jaws, you see it when Chief Brody realizes that the shark is in the water right there, where the perspective, he doesn't seem to move, but everything around him changes because what they're doing is that they're moving the camera closer to him, but they're pulling the focus of the lens out. So it, but you won't notice it unless you specifically watch for it. But when you do see it, you'll start seeing it in other movies from people who are mimicking what Spielberg did on that specific shot because they want to use the audience's familiarity with that moment, because that's when Brody realizes, holy crap, the shark is out there and the shark's attacking people. This is going to affect things in town. And that's the wonderful thing about film for me, is that filmmakers influence other filmmakers who then use their influences to enhance their own stories. And you'll see it from David Fincher, you'll see it from so many other filmmakers where they're literally borrowing, whether it's an homage or a direct ripoff or whatever, where you use the audience's familiarity with that type of filmmaking in other movies to bring a subconscious sense of understanding for what you're trying to go for.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, yeah, it totally makes sense. Who's your favorite director? Or do you have like a top 3?
I do have a top 3. And it'll change from day to day. But Martin Scorsese is absolutely in the top 3. Steven Spielberg. And this is the understanding that I don't think that they are infallible. There are Spielberg movies that I'm not particularly fond of. There are a couple of Scorsese movies I'm not particularly fond of. And the third one is actually a directing team from England from the 40s and 50s. It's Powell and Pressburger. They're these 2 British chaps who made so many great movies. And one of my favorites of theirs is called A Matter of Life and Death. From 1946. It stars David Niven, and it was literally made in the weeks after the end of World War II. And
wow.
And it's about a World War II pilot, played by David Niven, who his plane, at the start of the movie, his plane is about to crash. It takes place at the end of World War II, and his plane is about to crash into these moors in England, in the United Kingdom. And there's an American woman, and I believe it's played by Kim Hunter. I'm blanking at the moment, but she's on the radio with him, trying to kind of comfort him because he will die when this plane crashes. Except he doesn't die. The plane crashes. He actually wakes up hours later, miles away from where the plane finally crashed. And what happened was the angel who was sent to retrieve him pulled him out of the plane before it crashed and he actually died. So David Niven's character ends up meeting and falling in love with the radio operator. And then another angel comes down to say, it's time to go. You're supposed to be dead. And it eventually becomes a kind of like a courtroom drama where this man is literally on trial for his life. And it is one of the most beautiful movies you will ever see. And I had the opportunity to play at my theater in Santa Monica in the early 90s, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And years later, when I'm living in New York, Cassie and I had been married about 2.5 years at that point. I saw it was playing at the Lincoln Center, which is one of the great movie venues in New York City. It's where they hold the New York Film Festival every year. It's absolutely gorgeous, a wonderful place to see a movie. And I saw on their schedule that they were going to play A Matter of Life and Death. So I told Cassie, it's like, you're going to come see this movie with me. I'm not going to tell you anything about the movie other than it stars David Niven. And it will be one of your 10 most favorite movies of all time by the end of the movie. It's 2022. She still has her ticket from that screening. it did become one of her favorite movies of all time, and it's we own it on Blu-ray through the Criterion Collection. It is absolutely one of the most beautiful movies, and one of the reasons why it's beautiful is because the way that they made it, where the real life, quote unquote, is in color, and the afterlife is in black and white.
Oh,
Because you'd think it would be the other way around.
right.
Any other filmmaker making that movie would do the exact opposite, right? But that's one of the reasons why it's so great, is because they went against what you would think a filmmaker would do if you're jumping between Earth and the heavens.
Right. Ooh, I
And
love that though.
yeah, and then when it is in color, they use the Technicolor process, which was big in the 30s and 40s. If you've seen Gone with the Wind, you know how beautiful a Technicolor movie can be. So, but bouncing around between the two film stocks is just, the way they do it is just amazing. And then they also made a bunch of other movies like The Red Shoes and the Death and Life of Colonel Bloom. So Powell and Pressburger are amongst my top three. And so if you're unfamiliar with their movies, you should absolutely seek them out, whether it's you specifically, Abigail, or the people listening to this and they're like, oh, what the heck is he talking about? Find any movie with Powell and Pressburger. Now, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger both made movies independently of each other after the dissolution of their partnership, but for about a 15-year period, they made some of the best and most beautiful movies you will ever have the pleasure of seeing. The Red Shoes is a ballet drama.
Oh.
But again, it's shot in Technicolor. So the red shoes are so vibrantly red. And the way that they use color in their movies is just astounding. You cannot, if you love film, you cannot help but fall in love with Powell and Pressburger movies once you've had the opportunity to watch them. Now, there's so many other filmmakers that I could name, but of the filmmakers that I regularly go back to, I like David Fincher movies. I like, for the most part, Woody Allen movies of the 70s and 80s. I know that we're not supposed to like Woody Allen anymore, but there was a time in the 70s and 80s where he was one of the best filmmakers. There's, of course, Orson Welles, who it turns out I'm a distant relative of.
Oh, cool.
In fact, both Cassie and I are distant relatives of Orson Welles, but from completely different angles. She's an amateur genealogist, so we've been able to discover a couple of connections. But thankfully, there's no actual direct. It's not like, we're eighth cousins twice removed. I'm related to Teddy Roosevelt. She's related to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But the way that and they're of course cousins. Sorry. They're of course cousins, but the way that I go into one and she goes into the other, that's not connected. The only connection is that they are cousins.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So thankfully, our genealogy has literally shown only minuscule, very, 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 very distant connections like that. But both of us have direct great grandparents who were both on the Mayflower, but not from the same families. My seventh great grandfather was actually the founder of Cleveland.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you're a fan of Edgar Allan Poe, the story, The Fall of the House of Usher.
Yes.
Is based on a discovery in the house of Hezekiah Usher, who was my ninth great grandfather, who was also the very first bookseller in the colonies in America in the late 1600s. So, discovering all of these things, it's like, so, my family is a part of an Edgar Allan Poe story. How cool is that?
Right. Oh my gosh. I went to side quest.
Okay.
I went to Philadelphia recently, and they have an Edgar Allan Poe museum. It was one of his houses that he lived in Philadelphia.
Right.
And I went there, and it was so cool. They had like all of the. I got a raven, little stuffed animal, but that's so cool. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but just a general of how much I love movies and how much my wife appreciates my love for movies. We went to France after she graduated from law school in 2017, and we spent a month going around France. And one of the things that we did is we took a side trip to a town in Switzerland called Vevey. And the reason why is because Charlie Chaplin had retired to Vevey, Switzerland, when he finally left filmmaking. And he died in 1977, but in the mid 2010s, they turned his house and property into a Chaplin museum, an interactive Chaplin museum. And so my wife was like, okay, we'll go to Vevey and we'll go to the Chaplin estate, and we'll go to, it's now called Chaplin World. And if you love movies and you love Charlie Chaplin and you find yourself in that area of Europe any day, it's absolutely worth going. So it starts off, you come in through next to the main house, and they kind of take you into this side room that's been turned into a screening room. You sit down, it's a movie theater, and you sit down and you watch about a 15-minute movie about the life of Charlie Chaplin. And at the end of it, the screen rises up, and you are now at the entrance to the Chaplin Museum. And it's been set up in a way where it's literally a walk through Chaplin's life. So there's a lot of recreations of some of the more famous sets of his movies. It's got it's got many props from his various movies, as well as things from influences. So at one point or people who he influenced. So at one point, you walk in and you're in this room, and there's this lifelike statue of Federico Fellini, the Italian filmmaker, who started making movies decades after Chaplin, because Fellini was directly influenced by the films of Chaplin. And there's interactive things. Are you familiar with the movies of Charlie Chaplin at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a movie called The Gold Rush, where at one point he's in a house in the middle of nowhere. He's starving and he's eating his shoe. It's a very famous scene from the movie. So there's a space in there where you can actually go into a recreation of the shack that he's in and sit at the table at a recreation of the table, and you can kind of have somebody take a photo of you, quote unquote, eating a shoe. And the house is also on a gimbal, because if you watch the movie, the house kind of teeter-totters on the edge of a cliff. And so there's it's on a gimbal, which makes the room kind of be able to shake. So you could literally recreate the scene in this room, and it's all underground. Like, they literally hollowed out this entire section of his estate in order to create this underground museum that still kept the beauty of the property intact instead of building a bunch of buildings. It's got his honorary Oscars. It's got all of it. It's just an amazing thing. And we easily spent 3 hours there. And the point that I'm getting to is at the end, I had to buy a Charlie Chaplin bowler hat.
Yes, you did, of course.
Yeah. Which is, in my bedroom hanging on the wall right now. And I put it on from time to time and do the little tramp walk. I don't have a cane with me, but send my feet at angles and bend down a little bit and pretend I'm twirling a cane. So, but yeah, that's my life, is where I love movies. My bookshelf is filled with various ephemera of moviedom. I have 2 movie posters in my collection. I used to have thousands, but I eventually dwindled it out. I've got a Blade Runner: The Final Cut poster from 2007, because I actually got to play it at the theater I was working at the time, and Warner Brothers only ever made 50 of them, so it's a very rare poster. And so I've got that in my old office, and then I happen to have an original 1974 poster for Gone in 60 Seconds, which I keep hermetically sealed.
Oh
In,
yeah.
because I don't want to mess that thing up. So, but yeah, I love movies. In my office that I'm talking in right now, I've got a old Praxiscope, which was a device where you could spin it and would actually, it was decades before the movies, where you could actually put a little strip of paper in there and it would mimic uh, a scene of, like, a dog running or a horse galloping or whatever. And just because it's using a series of mirrors that are reflecting what the paper sees, but the way that it's spinning, it looks like motion.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh
and
cool.
yeah, and then I've also got a, a frame of films from various things. So 35, I've got 35 millimeter film, I've got 70 millimeter film, I've got strips of IMAX film, just to show, like, the difference of how the various types of film have evolved over the years. So uh, movies are my life. I love movies. I live movies. And I so much love doing my show because I've done so much studying about films and being working in movie theater for many years in the 80s. That's why I focus specifically on the 80s, because for me, the 80s were the most interesting decade for movies in my lifetime. And having not only watched so many of them, but played so many of them, uh, that I love being able to share my knowledge of cinema for people who either weren't alive yet when the 80s ended, or because of the way movies were released, that maybe they didn't get to see it. So uh, I don't know when this is going to be airing, but my first episode in November of 2022 is about a movie called Positive ID, which I guarantee you've never heard of.
Nope.
I guarantee you that practically nobody listening to this right now will know what this movie is unless they listen to my podcast, because it was a movie that was made in Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, by a professor of film at one of the local universities. I believe he's at UTA. But this guy made a movie with his students for $200,000 in 1985, and Universal Studios picked it up for release because they were looking for the next Blood Simple. They were looking for the next Coen brothers, and it was
Right.
and this movie kind of fit their bill. And despite the fact that it got a lot of attention on the film festival circuit, they opened it up and it didn't do a lot of business, and they kind of abandoned it. And because it has no stars and wasn't a hit and only ever got released in Texas, New York, and Los Angeles, um, nobody really remembers this movie anymore. I remember it because, again, I've been studying movies for many years, and this was a movie that looked interesting to me that I never really got the chance to see until years later, because the studio kind of buried it after it didn't perform the way that Blood Simple did. But thinking of a major movie studio in 2022 releasing like a $500,000 movie with no stars is almost unheard of. You even have, a movie like Barbarian still has, a Sarsgaard in it.
Right.
And even though it's being, even though it's an independently produced movie, it's actually being distributed by 20th Century Films, a division of Disney. So it's got the Disney machine behind it. But it's a a $4 or $5 million movie, and it's got Bill Sarsgaard in it from It and all these other movies, and it's not. And then the filmmaker is a guy from The Whitest Kids You Know, so it's not a completely independent movie with no stars. And the reason you're going to go see a movie like Positive ID is because you've heard good things about it. It's not because you're a fan of Bill Skarsgård or because you're a fan of Zach Kreger from The Whitest Kids You Know. Studios don't do that anymore. So, and that's one of the things I like doing with my show, is just highlighting how different the film industry has become in just 35, 40 years.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, I have one more question that I ask everybody, and then
Okay.
I promise I will let you go. Um, What inspires you, and what do you hope to inspire in others?
Um, life, it's such a cliche, but life inspires me. That I know I only have one time here on this plane of existence, and having spent all of this time in my life kind of gearing myself towards an ideal that didn't happen, to at least give the knowledge that I have to the world, whether they want it or not. And being able, because if I can talk about a movie like Positive ID, and somebody who's never heard of it sounds, okay, well, that sounds interesting. It's about a woman who, a year after she is brutally raped by a man who is getting an early release from jail, decides to take matters into her own hands. And in some ways, it is very similar to Blood Simple in that it's set in the in Texas, and it's a revenge story. But the way that she goes about getting her revenge is actually really inspiring, because she ends up leading a double life, creating a whole second life for herself in order to just get some kind of justice for herself against this man who brutally attacked her. And it's kind of like Death Wish or other revenge movies in a number of ways. But if one person who had never heard of this movie before went out and looked for it, and it's not that hard to find if you know what you're looking for, but they give this movie a chance and they like it, and then they tell somebody else, hey, I heard about this movie on this podcast that I'd never heard of before, and it's actually a pretty darn good movie. And then another person will give it a shot, and that's people who have never heard of this movie. And this is just one movie, but movies are an important part of our lives. uh, if I had $1 for every time that I'd heard that movies are dead, movies were supposed to die off when cable came around in the 70s. Movies were supposed to die off when Atari and other video game systems came around in the 70s and 80s. And movies were supposed to die when more people got cable, and then when VHS, and then when DVD, and then streaming, but we're still going to the movies, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because there is something, and not just watching movies at home, but we're going out to have this experience with other people, that we have a shared love of this specific type of experience that almost everybody does. The average person goes to movies 5 times a year, or pre-pandemic. It's probably a little lower now, which means that there's some people who don't go to movies ever, and some people who go to the movies 100, 200 times a year, but it averages out to about 5 per year per person. And so, but why do we do that? Why do we go out to the movies? It's because we want to have that shared experience. And so in this day and age where we're never going to have that shared experience of going to a movie theater together and seeing this very obscure movie from 1987, here's a different way to have a shared experience. I talk about something, you listen, you go, oh, that sounds interesting, give it a shot. And so I'm just using today's technology to share that experience with whoever wants to have that experience. And that's what motivates me. It's because there are so many good movies that were made during the 1980s that have been totally forgotten, because most people who do 80s podcasts, they talk about the same movies over and over again.
Right.
And it's not that I hate Ghostbusters or Gremlins or Indiana Jones. I love them. But I would rather be the guy who's talking about a movie that you've never heard of, that you don't remember, that you might actually find interesting if you just gave it a chance, if you just even knew about it. So that's what I try to do, is I try to do something different from what everybody else is doing within my niche. And the way that the podcast has grown in the last 3 months is very inspiring. Back in July, this podcast had a quarter of the listeners it has now. And every month I set new listening records, including this month, even though we still have 3.5 days left. I set another record already this month with 3 days to go, and I'm releasing at least one more episode before the end of the month. I'm going to be talking about the Nightmare on Elm Street movies because that's what you do during, the Halloween season. That's what, but I'm talking, and then also I don't just talk about how I felt about the movies. I help the listener understand the reasons behind the way that certain films got made. Because one of the things I'll share when I do the brief history of the Nightmare on Elm Street, Johnny Depp was in the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. He plays Glenn. It was his very first acting gig. And he didn't even audition for the movie initially. He went to the audition with one of his friends, Jackie Earle Haley, who ironically ended up playing Freddy Krueger in the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. But Jackie Earle Haley in 1983, when they were doing auditions for the movie, needed a ride to the audition, and Johnny Depp took him. The director's daughter, 14-year-old daughter, saw Johnny Depp in the waiting room and told her dad, "You need to get him." Literally, Johnny Depp's career exists because he took his friend to an audition, and the director's daughter fell in love with him just sort of from seeing him in the waiting room.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, that's how random life can be sometimes. He hadn't even been an actor for a year at that point. He had moved to Los Angeles to be a musician with his band. His band broke up, and he had ended up meeting Nicolas Cage, who kind of was, "Hey, you should become an actor. You've got a certain thing about you." And Nightmare on Elm Street ended up being his first movie, not because he had gone through the tribulations of being an actor and going to auditions, because he took a friend to an audition, and the right person, Wes Craven's daughter, saw him at that moment and told her dad, "You got to get that guy."
That's so interesting. And that's so weird how life works like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ed, for coming and talking to us. I really, really appreciate it. I had such a good time. I hope you did too.
I did, and I'll probably go on for another 2 or 3 hours, but I don't think my wife.
We'll just have to get you back on.
I have too many stories. I have so many stories of just random incidences and just how things kind of happen. I can tell you how I almost dated a 2-time Oscar-winning actress when she was a nobody, but maybe we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to get you back on to tell that story. Well, tell everybody where they can find you and your wonderful podcast.
Well, the website is the80smoviepodcast.com. That's 80s, the80smoviepodcast.com. I recently rebranded from a previous name, the Film Jerk Podcast. So I'm slowly building the website. I'm adding the new episodes as I create them, but getting the older episodes up, it's taking a lot longer than I expected. So you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you listen to your podcast. And I hate saying that because it's so cliched, but just do a search for the 80s Movie Podcast. You'll see other great 80s movies podcasts pop up, like all 80s movies podcasts and things like that. But ours is specifically the 80s Movie Podcast because I have an ego, and who doesn't have an ego when they're going to call themselves the 80s Movie Podcast?
Well, we love it. It's such a great show. Everybody go check it out. You can always, like I said, you can always find me on Twitter at MPWeirdo Podcast. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram, _main_weirdo1. You can also email me at manicpixieweirdo@protonmail.com. And, as always, check us out on all the different platforms. Thank you again so much, Ed. I really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate coming on. You have always been a great supporter of the show, and I can only repay you as best I can by coming and talking to you. And I would love to be on again whenever you want me. This was great.
Oh, yay. Okay, that's always good to hear. Thank you so much for coming. Um, as always, guys, be kind and stay weird. Have a good one. Bye, guys.